Look, that is a very
Yeah.
big danger we have to face. That situation is going to blow up and it's not going to be pretty. Well, I'm afraid that we are now governed by those people you saw up on the dais during the inauguration. The only dynamic center of the American capitalist system today is high tech, Silicon Valley. Those people now are the ones that are still making money. Everything else is either better done or more cheaply done or both elsewhere. Indeed, the United States' corporations moved ever since the 1970s in huge numbers. Look, half the cars produced in China now are produced by subsidiaries of American companies. The abandonment of America is something led by the corporations. Mr. Trump likes to point to the Chinese, but they didn't do it. They couldn't make the corporations go there. Those corporations went there because it was profitable. Here's my fear: the United States' mass of working class people are being prepared to function the way the poor of the rest of the world function. Look at it. This government wants to attack Social Security and Medicare
Yep.
and Medicaid. It wants to take away the few remaining supports. The federal minimum wage in this country is $7.25 per hour. It has been at that level since 2009. Every year since then, prices have gone up. Some years only 1 or 2%, other years 9 or 10%. Okay, that means for the last 16 years, 2009 to now, the poorest of the poor amongst us, people living on $7.25 an hour, have been savagely abused because every year with rising prices, that $7.25 buys you less. What kind of a society goes to people with $7.25 and does that to them? We
We
are seeing levels of cruelty. What about AI? My reaction to that is the same as what about computers? What about robots? What about all the big technical advances? They were always vehicles that could be used in different ways. Don't listen when someone tells you AI or electricity or robots must be this way. And I'm going to explain it with a simple example because it gets the idea across. Suppose there was a machine, AI, robot, doesn't matter, that made workers twice as productive as they used to be. And so instead of 10 widgets an hour, they could now make 20 widgets an hour. That typical AIG, supposed to allow one person to work the machine and get the output. Okay, here's what happens in capitalism. The capitalist says, oh, great. He buys the machine, fires half his workers because he doesn't need
Exactly.
them anymore because the other half are twice as productive. What does he do with the money that he saves from the half that he fired? He keeps it. More profit for himself. He's overjoyed, and that's how he uses the technical breakthrough. Okay, now let me give you an alternative. Suppose there were an enterprise that looked at the new AI or whatever it is and says, wow, it's twice as productive. Here's what we're going to do: we're going to buy that equipment or that machine. We're not going to fire anybody. We're going to reduce the workday from 8 hours to 4 hours. Why? Because now with the new machine, the AI, 4 hours can do as twice the work that it used to. We don't need people to work 4 hours. We can be the same firm, produce. Instead of firing the people, you lowered the workday. Now, let me ask you something. If you live in a democracy where the majority rule, we know which way the majority would want to go. Give me half my workday off as leisure because I can be more doubly productive. We don't do what's democratic. We do what's profitable for the tiny minority of people who own the business. So they fire half the workers. That's why we're afraid. It's not AI that's the problem. It's capitalism that uses each technological advance in order to do what they say they're going to do, maximize profit. I have taught in business schools. That's what businessmen and women think their job is, to maximize profit. But that helps the people who earn profit. It doesn't help the people who live on wages. But they're the majority. A democratic workplace would make the decisions that are best for the majority. We don't live in such a system. Capitalism is the enemy of democracy, and it always was. Unfortunately, if we had better leaders, they would be talking to us about it. What are we going to do as a nation? The road we are on of a declining empire becoming more and more unequal.
That even when we're declining, there are a smaller and smaller group of people becoming wealthier and wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. Those seem contradictory to me. How do we reconcile that?
Not at all, because it's exactly what happened in every other economy, every other empire. The people, and it's easy to understand why.
Okay.
When an economy is going up, the people at the top can afford to be generous. They're making a ton of money. They're becoming wealthy. Sure, they can pay an extra 4 or 5% a year to their workers. Keep them happy, avoid a strike. And there's so much money in the growth period that you can afford it. But when the economy goes down, what the people at the top have always done and are doing now in America is those at the top, the CEOs, the people who, we all know who they are. They use their wealth and power, shouldn't surprise you, to hold on. And because they have wealth and power, they can do that. They can hold on, which means the costs of the downturn, we, the rest of us, it's offloaded onto us. So what you're seeing is that the inequality in the United States gets worse. And look at the irony. I'll give you a statistic earlier this week. The most important research outfit in the world, Oxfam, located in Britain, keeps track of this, gave their annual report. And it added up the experience of the roughly 3,000 billionaires that exist in the world today. And as you rightly said, many of them are American. Not all by a long shot, but many of them. Here's the statistic it gave. Across the year 2024 just ended, the collective wealth of the 300 billionaires rose by over $6 billion per day. Capitalism as a global system is making those already super wealthy even more super wealthy. And that's what our leaders should be talking about. What do we do about it? Instead, what I'm watching at the inauguration and in the days since is a kind of lunatic theater. It's a theater in which the lead actor, Mr. Trump, pretends to be the world's tough guy. I'm gonna take back the Panama Canal. What? I'm gonna snatch Greenland for a golf course. I'm gonna make Canada the 51st state, and I'm gonna stick it to the Mexican. My God, every one of those issues, whether it's drug traffic or anything else, the war on drugs is at least 65, 70 years old. Every president has announced he's going to fight it, and every single president has lost that fight. We are surrounded with drugs today, every bit as much as when I was 10 years younger, 20 years younger, 30 years younger. I'm not fooled, and I don't think anyone in America is. The biggest change in drugs is that we, the Sackler family, which just made a settlement, produced enough opioids to kill 700,000 people over the last few years. We don't even need Mexico. We've got a drug problem in which Mexico doesn't figure. And as the new president of Mexico said, and she's quite right, the drug problem is a problem of supply and demand. Part of it is the supply that comes up in part through Mexico. But an enormous part of it is the demand. There is no drug trade unless America is the single largest buyer of that crap. Weren't doing it. I mean, what are you doing? He's trying to suggest to a frightened America that the problem is over there. The bad Panamanians, the bad Canadians. This is childish. This is gestures of desperation.
That's a really good
Mr.
point.
Trump has been the president before. Let me assure you, during his time as president, inequality in the United States, by all its measures, got worse. Now, I don't want to be unfair. They got worse under Biden, too. And they got worse under Obama, too. So he's not outstanding. But did he stop it? Not at all. The tax cut that he gave in December of 2017, first year of his office, was the worst blow to equality we could have had. Made the government bankrupt because it didn't have all the revenue that corporations and the rich no longer had to pay. So the government had to borrow, go into deficit. And who did it borrow from? The corporations and the rich. The money they didn't have to pay in taxes, they turned around and lent to the government instead, which means we, the people, are on the hook to repay all that money plus interest because our leader, Mr. Trump, gave them that tax cut. What are we as a nation going to do? How are we going to go through a declining empire? The United States now, the dollar is less and less a global currency. A few years ago, central banks around the world kept 80% of their reserves in the dollar. It was considered as good as gold or maybe better. Now that number is about 40%. Dollar is still important, but nothing like it was. Let me give you another example. These are big numbers everybody knows. The United States has a group of 7 nations, of which it is one, called the G7, the group of 7. The United States, Canada, Japan, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy. That used to be the powerhouse core of the economy of the world. The United States has the big one in the middle, and then the other 6 as its allies. Well, let's look at it today. If you add them all up, they together, all of them, U.S. and the other 6, produce about 26-27% of the world's output. But there's another group that has emerged. It's called the BRICS, B-R-I-C-S. That stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And the original 5, they started about 15 years ago. Now they are 22 countries. Now let me tell you very briefly about them. If you add up all the goods and services they produce in a year, the way I just did for the G7, the total portion of world output that they account for is about 35%. Let me remind you, the U.S. and its allies account for 27% of world output. BRICS, China and its allies, account for more, much more. They're an alternative pole in the world economy. That is the more enormous reality about our economy than anything else. Over the last 40 years until around 10 years ago, we lived in an age called neoliberalism, globalization. You might remember, we were told over and over again that it's good for the whole world that corporations close their shops in Cincinnati and move them to Shanghai, that we will all be better off to get these marvelous, for 30 years, and the corporations went, they had to. Their competitors were going, and they would have been outcompeted if they didn't go. China offered cheaper wages than Americans demanded. China offered the biggest growing market in the world because of their size. So every corporation sent its people over there. We teach people, if you want to have a successful business, go to where the wages are low and the market is growing. Okay, they listened to people like me and they went over there. That's why this is the area that is growing. We are becoming what they were, and they are becoming what we were. And that's very upsetting, but you don't solve it by pretending that it isn't there. We don't have the empire anymore. Let me remind folks, the war in Vietnam, which was a big turning point, was a war between the United States and the Communist Party of Vietnam. The United States lost the war. The people who have been running Vietnam since to this moment are the Communist Party who defeated the United States. I know this is upsetting, but you ought to face the reality. In Afghanistan, we went to war against the Taliban. That war is over. We lost. The Taliban now runs the country. In Iraq, we lost. How many hints do you need? You're not the big cheese in the world anymore. We are shifting to a nationalism. That's because we have to protect our industries because they can't compete with others. Oh, we'll blame the Chinese and they're all cheating. That's very boring and very old. It is what every country that loses in the competition says. But the fact of the matter is, to give you one example, 15 years ago, every automobile company in the world went to work to try to develop the best, cheapest electric car because that's the wave of the future. And we now have an unqualified winner. One country and one company produced the best, cheapest electric car. It's called the BYD Corporation. And if you never heard it, it's because it's Chinese. And you know what Mr. Biden, our president, did? He took the tariff. And remember, a tariff is a tax levied by the United States government on United States people paid to Washington. The tariff of Mr. Biden on the BYD electric car was 27%. Mr. Biden raised it to 100%. That means if BYD produces a $20,000 electric car and you, America, want to buy it for your company as an input or for yourself as your personal vehicle, you would have to give 20 grand to China to get the car, and then another 100%, 20,000 to Uncle Sam as a tax, costing you $40,000, which is why you don't see BYD cars on the roads in the United States. But if you went to Europe, as I recently did, you'll see them all over the road. United States, here's the irony. The United States thinks it's isolating the bad guys around the world. You know what the rest of the world now thinks? Their job is to isolate a rogue capitalism in the United States. We are putting tariffs on everybody. We're slapping everyone on, take back the Panama Canal, make Canada the 51st. You know what that looks like? Exactly, we all know what it looks like. Will Americans find it heady to think of themselves as powerful? Not as they understand. That's not an expression of power. That's a desperate theater because they can't face the loss of power that is our reality and which we could handle if we were honest enough to admit it. Whether we understand it or not, we're making a future in which everybody who wants a green version of whatever there is will be buying not American goods because they're not made that way. We're so strong and tough, we won't do it. And we're screwing ourselves. We're shooting ourselves in the foot. Every company in the world that competes with an American company and that buys cars and trucks as part of its business will be buying the Chinese car because it's the best deal any capitalist around the world can get for a car. Whereas the American can't get it because of the crazy tariff. That means, sure, we'll have a few more jobs for auto workers, but everybody else's job is becoming more uncertain because their employer can't get the competitively lower priced goods around the world that the American, it's awful to watch. And fooling the American people by telling them, we're going to protect you. You're not, you can't. We live in an interdependent world, which the United States helped to create, and now it wants to withdraw, to which the answer that history will give, way too little, way too late.
I mean, Professor Wolff, what are your thoughts on AI and its impact on our jobs, especially in light of this $500 billion promise?
let me break that into two parts. First, the 500 billion. That's just Mr. Trump bloviating. It has no meaning, and he got attacked by his buddy Elon Musk within minutes of issuing that, because there's no money to do. It's just, I'm going to the 500 billion. Where are you going to get the 500 billion? Musk really raked them over the coals. How these guys are great buddies after this is going to be a mystery to watch, unless neither of them listens to what the other one says, which I doubt. So this is all very early, vague speculation.
Now, Mr. Trump understood that in this changing world, Americans were being squeezed, and he was right about that. And you should understand that we're still in that situation, and Mr. Trump is president because of it. Here's how it works. Every empire, as it goes down, has the following procedure of handling it. The people at the top, the rich and the powerful, respond to the decline by saying, oh, this is terrible, but not for me. The top always offloads the difficulties and burdens of a decline onto those people less powerful and less rich than themselves. The emperor in Rome didn't suffer the way the average people did. The emperor in Persia or the emperor in Greece, it doesn't matter. All the empires show the same phenomena. Those at the top hold on, work harder than they used to hold on, because they know damn well it's going down. And who can't do that are the people who don't have much power and the people who don't have much wealth. And so the working class has to be, one way or another, squeezed as you go down. And we, you, me, we're all being squeezed. And in our naivete, we turn to the Republican and Democratic Party. Protect us. They can't. Oh, they'll tell you whatever you want to hear. You know that. We live in that. But they can't do anything, because the only real thing to do would be to say honestly to the people, oh, our empire's going down, it's going to be a hard thing, and maybe we all ought to get together to try to get through this difficulty together. Oh, that would be an interesting idea. We'd have a name like, I don't know, socialism. That would be rational. But we don't live rational. How do you squeeze the mass of people? A lot of ways. It's a little bit like that famous poem, how do I love thee, let me count the ways. How am I going to screw the working class? Let me count the ways. So for 40 or 50 years, we make sure that unions can't function. They can't do what they were invented to do, help the workers get a better deal. Not going to get that. We're going to demonize unions. We're going to make every union look like it's, that movie On the Waterfront, a bunch of crooks that are grabbing your dues every week, et cetera, et cetera. You've been living your life in that kind of an environment. It's changed the last few years as working people begin to get it. And they are. That's part of what this meeting is a sign of. Beginning. The Starbucks workers are beginning, and the Amazon workers are beginning. The labor movement is kind of coming back to life, but it's coming late in the process of squeezing the working class. Here's another way you squeeze the working class. You have this thing which you say is some kind of mystery. It's called an inflation. What? An inflation sounds like something you do to a balloon. What is an inflation? In economics, it just means prices are going up. But now let's be a little bit more careful. If you know anything about the inflation of the last few years, here's a little statistic. The inflation has gone up faster than average wages and salaries of people. Okay, now I'm going to do this very difficult arithmetic. If the money you have to spend, your wages and salaries, are not going up as fast as the prices, there are going to be things you can't afford anymore. Really special, expensive things, like eggs. What? But will someone honestly tell you that the inflation is a way of squeezing the workers? Not. You look long and hard, you won't get it. The inflation in eggs is due to bird flu. Huh? What? I'm talking to people, I'm not going to be mean, but half of you believe that. And the other half of you think it might be true. Here's what an inflation is. It's a decision made by some people to jack up the price you have to pay for the things they can control the prices of. Who sets prices in a capitalist economy? Answer, the employer. Those of you who have had jobs all your life as workers, Do you ever recall being called into an office to add your opinion as to what the price should be of what you helped to produce? Never happened. The United States Census tells us 3% of Americans are employers. Welcome to the other 97%. That's you and me. The employers set the prices. We pay them. When they jack up the price, that's because they want to give us fewer of whatever it is they make for the money we have to give them. It's a way of screwing the working class. And that's how it's been used in the last few years. And all these economics professors, including many of mine and people I know, sit around debating, how are we going to control the inflation? What is it? And how does it happen? I sit there, I'm one of their students, and I want to run up there and hit them over the head with a ping pong paddle. What are you doing? What is this noise coming out of your mouth? And then their decision, which really, at this point, I hope I'm getting to you, you're getting upset. Their decision is we're going to deal with it by raising interest rates. Oh, wow, this is wonderful. Who gets screwed when you raise an interest rate? In case you're not rich yourself, I'm going to tell you, it's not rich people. They don't give a flying whether the interest rate is 2%, 6%. They're rich. That's what it means to be rich. You don't care. But you have to care because it's going to mean that little bit of money at the end of the month that you have to pay on your credit card is going to be bigger than it was before. And everything works like that. The rich don't care. You know what that's like? It's like, I'm going to stick it to you now for a moment, congestion pricing. Oh, good. We have a problem in New York with traffic. This should come as hot news. It's only been true for a century. And we're going to finally do something. Oh, really? Yeah, what? We're going to tax everybody the same. What? The same. A rich person who will not give a damn, and the poor person for whom this adds up as an extra buck or two every time you do something, if you have to come in and out of Manhattan, et cetera, et cetera. Only an American politician who's just seen what inflation has done to people would come up with that solution. And by the way, raising interest rates, because I can see it perked some of your interest, is that the only way to deal with an inflation? Of course not. Why did you ever think it? Answer, because that's what you were fed all the time in all the media. The last time the United States had an inflation as bad as the one a couple of years ago, right, was back in the late 70s and 80s. We had funded the war in Vietnam by printing a lot of money because otherwise the people would have revolted against it. If you'd said to everybody, we're having a war in Vietnam, it's going to cost every family a couple $1,000 a year. Whip, end of war. So we borrowed. We printed money and we borrowed. And then we had the terrible inflation. And then a conservative Republican president, Richard Nixon, went on the television August 15th, 1971, and said, I'm going to do something about this terrible inflation. Oh, good. There was tremendous suffering in the country and a lot of pressure. And put that together with the problems with the war, he had to do something. So he declared a wage price freeze that day, 15th of August. As of tomorrow morning, he said, this conservative Republican president who became president by becoming the champion of anti-communism. As of tomorrow morning, he said, any business that raises its prices, we will come for you, we will arrest you, and you go to jail. Guess what? The next morning, inflation vanished. Amazing. Are you surprised? Shouldn't be. Is this a story about how you control an inflation? Yeah. Did it work? Yeah. Did it happen in the United States? Yeah. Do you know about it? No. And the people at the Federal Reserve who decide interest rates, they made sure not to ask about it, not to talk about it, not to debate it. You know how the United States became a big, powerful country? By doing to Europe what the Chinese are doing to us. It's not new, it's not different. The only question is, why would it be surprising? What a strange behavior is going on here. Now, where is this taking us? We're remarkably alienated from the conventional Republican and Democratic parties. They didn't feel those parties were doing much for them, which is true. That those parties weren't protecting them from a decline they couldn't quite pinpoint, but they felt, particularly over the last 30 years. Their budgets were squeezed, You might have noticed that 40 years ago, the level of household debt in this country was small. Nowadays, everybody is loaded with debt. I can add, if you're interested, that corporate debt is at a higher level than it's ever been in our country, and government debt. In other words, we are a country in debt on a scale we didn't imagine 10 years ago, let alone think we would have now. There's a name for companies that have been for several years so deeply in debt that they don't make enough profit, ready, to service their debt, that is, to pay the interest and the portion they have to repay. Now, we have a special name in economics for them. I kid you not, I didn't make this up. Zombie corporations, because they're dead. They're economically defunct. You know how they manage to survive when their profits aren't enough to cover their debts? They take on more debt to pay the debt they couldn't otherwise cover. Uh-oh, that makes them more zombie-ish next year than they were this year, which is what's happening. You might wonder, who lends money to all these indebted people, businesses, and government? Well, let me start with the government, because if you thought the world was crazy before, wait till you get this. The two biggest creditors of the United States government are Japan and China. Japan number one, China number two. A few years ago, it was the other way. China was number one, Japan was number two. The United States is the biggest debtor country in the world by countries. The second biggest creditor of the United States as the biggest debtor is the People's Republic of China. Do you understand? The United States owes China $850 billion, roughly. It has to pay interest, of course, on that debt, like it has to pay on others. Which means I'm here to tell you that a portion of the taxes every one of you in this room pays when you buy a bottle of beer, or you smoke a cigarette, or you pay your taxes, a portion of that money, you should be very pleased, is collected by the United States government, not used for houses or medical care or student loans, but shipped to China as interest on the debt to enable them to build their military capacity to fight the United States.
I'm going to begin with Mexico. That's one of the countries that's been in the news a lot, partly because the threat of the Trump administration to deport 15 million undocumented immigrants, most of which would be deported across our southern border into Mexico. At the same time, he has threatened to impose tariffs of all kinds on some or all of Mexico's exports into the United States. And Mexico, because it's a relatively poor country, the remittances, that's what we call the money going back across the border to Mexico, are a very important part of the Mexican economy. It enables villagers to buy things in their little communities because they have the money sent by their relatives in the United States. If you suddenly deport millions of people, the remittances are going to crash. They're not going to come to Mexico. That would be a shock of major importance. But it's only the beginning of what these deportations and these tariffs that are threatened, what they mean. The Mexican economy, since the time of the NAFTA agreement signed by President Clinton and later renewed by President Trump in his first term, those specifically block the United States from imposing tariffs. That's why those treaties were signed, and they were signed by 2 U.S. presidents. Well, the Mexican economy, the largest export market for Mexico, is the United States. If you raise the price to Americans of everything coming from Mexico because you add a tax, that's all a tariff is, a tax on something coming in from Mexico to the U.S., you're going to stop Americans from buying Mexican exports the way they have. Right. That's going to close their markets in their major market. And you know what it's going to do? Throw millions of Mexicans out of work. Those jobs are going to disappear. Do the American people really want a fundamentally destabilized society along 1,000 miles of a common border? I don't predict the future. I don't believe in it. I can't do it. I don't think anyone else can. So inevitability is a word that I don't think, it's not in my vocabulary.
Got it.
I don't know. I believe it's always possible to make interventions to change things. And in any case, that's what we have to try to do.
Okay.
Otherwise, we're not really full citizens and full human beings. But I want to make it clear, I believe the United States is heading headlong into a dead end, economically and therefore also politically and ideologically. We as a nation were remarkable in the 19th and 20th century. We provided roughly from 1820 to roughly 1970 rising real wages for the American working class every decade for 150 years. That made us special. No other working class in any other capitalist country got that story. That's why millions of people came to the United States from Europe, for example, during the 19th and earlier 20th centuries, because they expected a better deal here than they could get in Europe, and they got it. All right, that made us think we were very special. The religious amongst us thought that God somehow smiled more on America than he or she or whatever you think it is smiled elsewhere. But the reality is it had to do with a particular position in the world at that time that we occupied. I don't want to take us away. We made an effort, take advantage of that situation, and we did pretty well for a while. That is now over, and it's not coming back. And the question of the world right now is, will there be a new empire to replace the American, the way the American replaced the British? And will that new empire be Chinese? Is that one option? You bet. Let me remind in closing, the United States and its G7 allies together comprise somewhere around, let's be generous, 12 to 15% of the world's people. The BRICS today, with their 22 countries, comprise roughly 60% of the world's people. The future is with them, not with us. We can work a deal, we can work an accommodation, we can make it work for both sides, but we have to be willing to do that. Instead, our leaders are full of bravado and ugly bullying, and we're going to shut you down and close you off and bomb you into the... Wow, that's not an auspicious sign for a loser. And I know that's hard for Americans, but that's the reality. But we can make it work, I believe so, and we can make it a good time for the American people, if not for the billionaires. But then we have to face the situation we're in and how to make the best of it. We're not doing that, and we're losing precious years while we go through these desperate gestures of self-delusional make-believe.
By the way, there are think tanks all over America that are asking the same question. They're worried. Is the labor movement waking up in a way that could change all of this? People were being worked at unbelievable stress in Amazon warehouse for years, or in Starbucks coffee shops for years. But in the last 2 or 3 years, enough is enough, no more. We're gonna, that remarkable group, Chris Smalls and folks out there in Staten Island, that's a remarkable and has had effects everywhere else. The Boeing workers on the West Coast rejected 3 contracts before they accepted the one that they found, which was better than the ones that they had rejected. The labor movement, that's the question. If this gives you a swell head, that's my point. It is more in your hands than you think of, because in addition to saving yourselves, if it's a time of decline, if the people who run this society are so busy denying it, refusing to face it, as I've tried to show you, then we are stronger than we might suspect, and they are weaker than they might feel confident about. And that's a good time for us to act. The conditions are pretty good, not terrible, as some of my fellow leftists are worrying about. Of course, we have problems and difficulties. I'm not pretending otherwise. But we also have an historical moment that the old Cold War mentality, that everything to the left is evil, bad, won't work, is dead. That generation died and took it with him. Young people today don't have that mentality. They're much more open to what it is.